hand over to our speaker for the day.
I'm a volunteer at Britannia Mill, and I prepared this amazing little introduction to this presentation, which is actually not entirely mine, lots of my interjections, but basically it's the work of Barbara, who put together this collection of items to be representative of the collection. So I have got you some food for thought. I've got a feast for your eyes. You're going to relish it, you're going to savour it, you're not going to eat it. There's no E numbers, but there are a number of E's. When I first saw some of these things, they excited me. They made me enthusiastic. I was enlightened by them. I hope you're going to be. I was entertained. You're going to be entertained, I'm sure. And maybe even possibly a teeny bit educated as well, because I might have a few snippets of information. I hope so. Most of all, I just hope you're going to enjoy seeing the things, and we're going to get going. So now you can see this little item is, can you see it?
It's tiny.
Keep it still, Alex.
I'm trying to get
that's it. If you keep it still, I'll have a look at where it is on the screen. So this little knitted item is called a Pence jug. You can see it's knitted in red, very fine red and black and white thread, and it has this metal ring around the neck. I'm holding the handle between my finger and thumb, and the ring would come over the neck and onto the handle to make the neck wide enough to access the coins inside. And it's to store coins in. A little Victorian object, which the coins are huge. You'll remember those if you were around in 1971. Victorian pennies. They did obviously help it to stand up because it hasn't got a flat base, although lots of the patterns that appear in Victorian knitting manuals, like this little one here, it's okay, Alex, yeah. So this one, ooh, can we get it close enough? Does it need to be closer?
Yes, that's lovely.
There, the Pence jug pattern, the very Pence jug that I'm going to show you that Barbara has knitted as a replica. It specifies in this little book that you should have German wool, and in fact Barbara was true to the pattern. I think you'll recognise that probably as Zauberwool sock wool. And this is a pattern that has a flat base, which makes it possible for the Pence jug to be stored on a mantelpiece or a shelf. The book's a delight. Can you see the title? The Knitter's Friend, Original Receipts in Knitting and Netting. You can make yourself all sorts of useful items like hair nets called, oh, I can't remember the name of them. So there we are. The Circassian cap. I don't think many of us will be wearing those. But that was published in 1847, and it's one of our earliest things. And the next item, I think our earliest is 1820 something. I'm showing you these roughly in chronological order. Now, this item, a pair of stockings, if I can get that in focus a bit better. Oh, there, you can see the lovely lace up the front of these stockings. Looking at the screen, hoping I'm giving you a good view of them. They're a rather strange shape, got a very long foot. In fact, much longer than mine. Not getting a very clear view of that, am I? Much longer than my foot. I'm not sure that these are late 1800s probably, and the construction is a spiral toe and a heel that could be Dutch, it could be French. I'm afraid I'm not a heel expert, but Ruth, who is definitely into the history of these items, and it's very hard to pull apart, says it's most likely to be French because it comes to a point here. I'm not seeing that very clearly, are you? I don't know if you can see it at all. Oops, I'm going off piste here. Oh, that's yes, probably better.
That now. Yes.
Is that better? Yeah. A very long foot. Some of the width, some of the length might have been taken up when a foot was put inside, but these hardly look worn. They're made of a very firm fabric created by fine cotton, knitted in fine cotton, and beautifully executed lace panel up the front, all the way from the instep to the knee. They're also beautifully shaped. I don't know if you can see that. There's a seam line created with a single stitch, I dare say. You can probably see that. And paired increases and decreases for a very fine shaped calf. So many socks in the collection for all sorts of purposes. Thick, heavy seamen's socks, tiny children's socks, stockings with initials knitted into the top. I looked in these old knitting books, which are actually mine, but the Guild has many copies of this. It was a very popular beehive knitting book, Peyton's and Baldwin's Woolcraft. And of course, you can see that page has the sock structure on it. I've knitted socks, many pairs, but always from the same pattern, always slavishly following the instructions and never learning the technique. On to some other lace now. This is, we're on the first one. There we go. This lace is probably a less useful item than stockings, but it was very useful in Victorian times. This is a pin cushion cover. You can see I'm sliding my fingers into the pouch, which held the pad. And pin cushion cover, very elaborate. This pattern is called Print of the Wave, and it's a Shetland pattern. It was, I think, a lady called Jane Gauguin published it in a book in 1842. I keep giving you the wrong century, don't I? It was later on, the same pattern was described as leaf and trellis. It's still very popular. It's beautiful, very, very delicate. Of course, this would have had a pad inside it to hold the pins. And if I can get that near enough, can you see some pink thread in the middle there? Is that clear? And also some green thread on the corner. These are damage limitation threads. The item comes to the Guild in its used state, and the thread that's being used here is merely to stop the damage spreading. It's not to mend it or try and replicate the original knitting. So very fine knitted lace for a pincushion cover. Seems a strange item for us, but here's a pincushion cover with its pad in. Of course, they weren't pins as we would think of now for dressmaking. They were pins for hats. And you can see this one has its damage mended, but it was done contemporary with the use of the cushion and the pad. On the back, well, we assume it's the back because the back has suffered no damage. There's another pattern. Again, fine, fine knitted lace, very beautiful. And knitted in cotton. Now, the next item that we've got a few items like this in the of this sort, I should say, in the collection. First of all, I'm going to show you a book that some of you will be familiar with. This is the Rowan knitting book, Knitting and Crochet, book number 55. And there's a substantial article in here about Irish crochet with pictures of the families all working these motifs. Irish crochet was a style of crochet where small individual flowers, leaves were assembled on a background of netted crochet. And the motifs could be done by individuals, and they would get money for each one. They'd be paid for each one. And then they could be assembled into garments, items of household textile, bedding, bed linen, all sorts of things. Very beautiful, very expensive, and a nice little earner for some poor home workers. There's a whole class of women here learning how to do it. The crochet, this is not knitted lace, this is crocheted lace, was then assembled. And here, got a lovely evening bag. And you can see the raised motifs that somebody has made independently of the bag, and then they've been formed into this garland. Sometimes they were crocheted over a cord or a wadding, and sometimes they were just the flat crochet. Sometimes there were multiple layers of crochet, like these little flowers. We've got more than one layer. This is lined, and it appears in the most amazing photograph in this Rowan book, which shows this gorgeous model with the beautiful hair holding the very same bag.
Wow.
Yes, isn't she lovely? These were very expensive items of clothing. She's wearing a sort of blouse capelet thing there as well. You can see her on those pages, and of course she's here. She is in the cape. Ooh, which way do I need to go with that? That way. There she is. So appropriate is her hair to the name Irish Crochet. She looks like an Irish beauty. This picture, though, shows one of the major items in the collection. It was bought by public donation way back in the 1990s. It was an Irish crochet wedding dress, but in fact, I think this model is wearing it as as an Irish seductress, because she hasn't got the lining underneath. I don't think any Edwardian bride would have dared show herself like that before the wedding night, at least. So we have several items of clothing, and here's another one. And the interesting thing about this, I'll just hang on to that, Alex, a moment, please. This one, the collar, you may be able to see. I hope you can. You may be able to see it's much whiter than the bag. And sometimes these things were done in cotton, and sometimes very fine cotton, and sometimes they were made in flax, which gave a better drape. But I think the flax was less favoured because it was not so easy to get a good bright white, which was more popular. And this little collar, so dainty, with its tiny buttons. I don't know if you can see those tiny buttons.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's its accession number. Everything that we have in the collection is accessioned and has some information about it. It has information about it, which is either from the backstory that we get when we receive a donation, or it's from extensive research by the people who work here as volunteers. For instance, Barbara, Angharad, Tricia, Maureen, they all do all sorts of in-depth research and searching through patterns and the like to get more information about the things that we have here. This is a beautiful book, and this illustrates how the Irish crochet business, if you like, boomed. This is a book of all the patterns, instruction, how to create various subjects in Irish crochet lace. And the back of it then, so you've got all the motifs, very, very complex, getting more and more difficult as the book goes on. I like that one there. More and more complicated and intricate designs, but then at the back are the patterns for assembling them. Actually, this must be on some kind of linen too. So this was a book published by a company that was producing flax, fine flax for making Irish linen. So one of the many books in the collection. A different kind of crochet now. This is filet crochet. And it's a tea cozy. Nothing would be kept cozy by this as it is. It would have had a pad inside it, rather like the pincushion covers. I'm pulling that out now, aren't I? But not, I think we have one in the collection that has its original pad. I hope you can see that it's a butterfly design. And one of the delights of the collection here is that we can find amongst the articles in it, that we can find matching pattern. This is a copy of the publication that this design comes from. And it's a Weldon's practical crochet, 3D it cost. It came out monthly. And this one, now if I find my information for it, was dated, says she, looking back, I think this one was from 1922. So we've moved from the Edwardian Irish crochet up a decade, if you like, and we're now in 1922 with delightful, this is a pattern for a tablecloth matching your tea cozy with butterflies all around. A lot of work for afternoon tea. There we go. Now, in the item on Irish crochet in the Rowan book, it does say, it suggested that, I think Manchester School of Embroidery or something suggested that you kept your crochet motifs and threads in a neat basket because they could descend into an awful tangle and an impossible mess. And this is where the origin of this device. For crochet, it's a wristlet, let me get that in focus, a wristlet crochet ball holder. Can you see that?
Mhm.
It was invented, patented actually in 1912 originally, but this one is the improved version. Because in 1912 it had a fixed disc at right angles to the legs, if you like, to the wire that went through the ball. And this one is a hinge disc. This is the new improved version. And this is the bangle that would go around your wrist, as it shows in the picture there. And it would keep your crochet very neat and orderly. There's some spiel at the beginning of that advertisement about stopping your, you find it lovingly coiled its spotless lengths, on and on, perhaps to be recovered somewhat the worse for its wanderings, the prize of the playful family kitten. I think advertising has become a bit more zappy than that, hasn't it? But intriguing little device. This next item, this next item, you can see how heavy that is. I'm going to spread it onto this cloth and hope that you can get the full view of it. Of course, we could move back and hold it up for you, but do you think you can see it from there? Do you want full view?
Fine.
This really very heavy sort of floppy garment is a combination of knit and crochet. And it's made of some really weighty stuff called art silk. That's not because it's super arty, it's short for artificial. It's made of rayon. It's quite a thick yarn, this one. It looks to me as though it might be about double knitting weight. It's knitted in panels, but the remarkable thing about it is that we have the publication it came from, and it was a prize-winning jumper. Smart Jumpers in Knitting and Crochet from Leach's Sixpenny series. And it was a jumper that won £100. That was a substantial amount of money for the pattern. And it was a competition to design a jumper using Celanese art silk. And this one is a very simple construction. Ours doesn't follow the pattern exactly, but it's clear from the illustrations that it certainly is this jumper. Here's one of the illustrations. And this was a series of rectangles assembled to make a jumper shape. In the original pattern, it doesn't have sleeves at all, and it's much wider. The sleeves are just drop from the side. But this knitter has created a sleeve shape, clearly didn't like the width. The band at the base is sewn on and then gathered slightly and tied with a cord. This stuff
I think in this picture you can see it looks as though it's got a sleeve, and that may have been the inspiration for changing the pattern. This art silk was impossible to handle without assistance. They sold it in hanks, and you know, in those days you had to wind everything, didn't you? This had to be wound, but it would refuse to stay in a ball. That definitely would fall into a tangled heap. And so there were various, we think maybe items given away when you purchased art silk. This is one of them. Felix keeps on walking. Well, actually it says Felix keeps on knitting, but the famous song was Felix keeps on walking. It was from the 20s. There he is, looking more like a wolf than a cat. And he was a very popular character, and just then as now, these popular characters are utilised to help with sales. And you can see if the yarn was wound around this cross-shaped piece of wood, Felix's paws and his head and tail would still stick out, and the writing would be omitted. But we think there are a number of them in the collection, and we think maybe these were given away when you purchased the art silk. So that's one type, and there are many variations on a theme. This one, I'll show it with the back, has got a name branded across the middle, rather like the Felix keeps on knitting. And if the silk were removed, which we will not do, that's as it came to the collection, it would say the Grand Pygmalion. And the Grand Pygmalion has a history of its own. It was a shop in Leeds, a big department store, one of the first ones. It was opened in 1888, and there's a picture of what it looked like on Ball Lane, the splendid building of the time. But the publicity just before it was opened was very interesting. It said in the Leeds Mercury, Pygmalion, lo, behold, it breathes, it lives, see the beauty and perfection created out of the dust and rubbish of the slumbering past. Obviously directed at ladies, it added, ladies will please notice that we have erected new fitting rooms and lavatories with every convenience, and which we hope will be a comfort and a boon to ladies visiting. I'm sure the ladies were delighted when they'd finished selecting their art silk to leave the shop with their art silk and their Grand Pygmalion winder, and have the use of the convenience as well if they needed it. So this next one is also a yarn holder, but from your own stomping ground. This was designed by a Birmingham company. Rather splendid. This one not for art silk, this one for wool. And you can see it's got 4 segments, one of which swivels, so you can insert the ball of wool. Rather a small ball, but then if you were winding the wool yourself, it was easy to determine a suitable size to fit in there. None of the commercial balls of wool would fit in that. It was a company that was described in 1929 at the British Industries Fair as manufacturers of silver, tortoise shell and enamel brushware, caskets, cups, cigarette cases and boxes, flower vases and bowls, military sets, manicures, photo frames, tea sets, special line in tear-off match cases, and a member of the Birmingham Jewellers and Silversmiths Association. So that was by the owner of that company was John Blennerhassett. Barbara suggested that it might have been a luxury item, since that company considered a luxury item, since that company specialized in sort of gift type things, and probably not one that you'd buy for yourself, but maybe one that would be gifted to you as its ribbon to hang it from your wrist in the same way as the other. My favorite of all, though, now is Susie. Here's Susie. This one later still, 1935, it's almost, to me, it looks almost good enough to eat. It's very tactile. It's got a lovely case. Don't lose your wool. A lovely expanding bangle made of some kind of plastic, I guess, with this attachment with a hook. And these lovely sprung legs, which would be detached from this, pushed through the middle of the ball, and the springiness and the feet at the end, which are also like sweets. It's good enough to eat this. We're back to food again.
You ready for your lunch, Kathleen?
So springy legs and little luscious feet, and the whole thing neatly into, I'd love to own this, the whole thing neatly into its little pouch. Brilliant. There we go. Now some garments. This next item comes from a pattern that appeared in the Daily Telegraph. Here we are. Oh, I think I've got the whole thing there. Yeah. Oh, there's the original. And it's called the Royal Babies Fisherman's Sweater. This was a popular thing to do in the 1940s. Patterns were given away quite often in newspapers. That's a larger copy of the same thing. Free, given free. And obviously its popularity is because of it being called a Royal Babies sweater. But as it's late 1940s, you would it'd have to be Prince Charles, wouldn't it? And I think he was 1948. So, and this certainly isn't a baby size. I'm not sure what size this would fit, but presumably there were other sizes in the pattern. And this is beautifully knitted, absolutely beautifully knitted. We know the lady who donated it, a lady called Irene Wilkinson. She knitted it in the 40s, in the late 40s, and she didn't have the leaflet. The leaflet has come separately from the actual garment. And this is knitted in traditional Gansey style. There's no side seams. It's knitted in the round up to the armholes. And then the back and the front are knitted straight up. And the sleeves are picked up stitches and knitted down in the round. Tragically, and I could not bear this if it were my work, knitted in 3-ply, by the way, so beautifully, so even and so neat. And there's a mistake. I wonder if you can see the mistake.
Yeah.
What a nightmare. I would have definitely pulled back that. I mean, she must have spotted that before she added the sleeves. Definitely have pulled that back. I couldn't bear it. It's perfect in every way, other than that. There we go.
Gorgeous.
Tragedy. So it's knitted in Gansey style, I'm assured, but I'm not an expert on Ganseys and Arons. Very fine needles. I think it says, 12s and 14s. Well, I knit on those as well. A 3-ply wool, yes. And Barbara's added a note here saying that the sleeves would have been it recommends circular needles, but, and some double pointed needles, but 16-inch circular needles with a wire cable, it says, for the sleeves. And that sounds like a tricky operation. So now we go on to another collection of things. These have been donated from Peyton and Baldwin, or the Coates collection, we call it, Coates and Peytons and Baldwin. And these are items which have been collected by that company as inspiration for patterns and as reference, really. And it was at the time when a man called James Norbury was the chief pattern designer for Peytons and Baldwins, and he was an expert on traditional knitting, mostly in Northern European countries. And of course, these are from Shetland, and this other item that's from the collection are from Latvia, Latvian mittens. And he was a very well-known figure in the 50s. He had television programs. I've got some information here about one called About the Home. And in that particular one in 1952, there was a piece about cobweb knitting. James and its builders. James Norbury describes how fine modern knitting is derived from Shetland knitting and shows examples from his collection. So he used these for Peyton's and Baldwin's inspiration for patterns, but also for his own publications and his own, he did books and his own patterns. Very beautiful, unused state because they're from this very extensive collection. I think we had more than 50 items, correct? Yeah.
Coats collection.
Coats collection, yeah. So, here we go, more clothing. Now this is lovely because this has a backstory, which is always nice to have. It's a little child's waistcoat from, I hope you can see that clearly, from early 1950s, looking a little bit yellowed in its, probably more so than it was originally, but it's a flower pot design. And here's the pattern, the Peyton and Baldwin's pattern, nicely segued from the last item. There's two little girls sporting kittens and flower pots. Obviously intended for a little girl, but this one was knitted for a little boy. And the lady who donated it was his older sister. Her little brother wore this in 1954. The pattern was published in 1952, which was when the little boy was born. But we have a picture of him, super duper picture, of little Jonathan wearing this exact waistcoat. How wonderful is that? His mum obviously loved the waistcoat enough to remove some of the flowers that should have been embroidered on there and make it. I wonder if she was disappointed that she had a boy. It's got a lovely back to it as well. Very, very neatly knitted. There we go. Now, more flowers. More flowers. You don't have to love everything that comes into the collection, says she. I do not love these. And there are lots of things in the collection which you may describe as nothing less than hideous. But they represent a fashion or a technique or some development. And these certainly do that because these things were popular right through at least 2 decades. They're described on the pattern that we have here, well, with a number of patterns for it, they're described as a luncheon set. And I can't think of anything less appropriate than the meal that's presented on them. You've got spring pansies with a winter stew sitting on top. To my way of thinking, those are hideous. And that you may disagree with me, but this, other people certainly did, because this pattern was being published right from the 1950s up to 75. And it started off at a price of 4D in the 1950s. And it ended up in 1975 with a code letter to put the price on, but it had definitely gone up to 10p. So from 4D to 2 shillings. These doilies were so popular that there are quite a lot of them about. And I have to say, if anybody's interested in sewing and watched the Sewing Bee, which I love, you may disagree with that too, but they do a transformation challenge. And on the final episode, the 3 finalists were given the task of transforming from a table of discarded textiles, making some item of clothing. And I spotted straight away, they jumped out at me, on the discarded textiles table were some of our yellow and mauve and green pansy doilies. I can't help but agree with them, but they have to be here. They represent an important part of the history of knitting and crochet. And actually, they look like a little dress folded like that. There we go. And now we're on to something that I am absolutely wowed by. This is my inspiration for starting knitting again. You'll recognise this. The recent loss of Patricia Roberts is tragic. This is the woman who reinvented knitting to my way of thinking. She was so innovative, so fashion conscious, she had such a great eye for colours and for style. And she started in about 1972, I'll get that wrong. Let me have a look. 1972, she went freelance. And by 1976, she had her own brand of wool called Woolly Bear Yarn. She'd previously done patterns in other people's wool. And this one, Pierrot sweater, comes from book number 8, when she was well into being a hugely influential designer. And you can see that front cover. If I had this jumper, I would not have parted with it. I would have spent ages trying to fit into it still. If not, I would just have lusted after its lovely shape and style and colour in my drawer. That's the back. And her haircut isn't half bad either. I love the techniques that she's used. I love these insertions under the sleeves. It's so innovative. She got me knitting again. My pattern book, you can see, absolutely battered and worn out. But I will show you the centre page is as this pattern was presented in the book, in very different colours and different styles too. Cardigan, short jumper, V-neck jumper, and so interestingly styled and combined with all sorts of different textiles. The woman who knitted this had never knitted anything so complicated before. She was a stay-at-home young mum with no money, but she thought she had time to do this. Nevertheless, it did take her 6 months because she'd never done any bobbles or cables or colour changes. It was very, very complicated for her. And having done all that work, how could she part with it?
What's the back like, Julia?
Oh, the back is set the same.
Inside, I mean.
Oh, inside.
Yeah.
Oh, now Alex is being super critical. What's the inside like? Now, that's interesting because she's obviously changed her technique there, hasn't she?
Has.
Yes. This is something that people in the know do. I dare say some of you do. I never look inside because I'm ashamed of the inside of most of my jumpers. And I think no one's ever going to look there. Wrong. Anyway, I love that. And I love some of her other designs. But this one equally is stunning. This one is a jumper that was a free pattern, again, in a newspaper. It was the Sunday Times this time. Oh, sorry. It was very, very popular to give out free patterns. Well, you had to send away for this one to Guiseley, which I hope you can see the whole jumper here. Let me bring it down a bit, which was a heavy knitting area. This is the neck. It's beautifully knitted. It's very, very handsome. And can you see the pattern on the front? It's called a wheat sheaf sweater. This reminds me a little bit of Irish crochet because of this deep texture, but it's not all knitted. Some of it is definitely embroidered on, but obviously the cabling and the on these sleeves and cuffs, etc., is knitted, all knitted. But some of this design is embroidered on. It's exquisite, I think. I'm not sure it would suit many people. Quite heavy design on the front, but the model in the Sunday Times looked very nice in it. Very beautiful knitwear. And we don't always, as I say, keep things because they're beautiful. This is interesting.
It's not beautiful.
We can't call it beautiful. this is a snooker jumper. We have a lot of picture jumpers in the collection. Let's see if I can get all of that in. And this is just one of them. But this is quite a feat, really, that this lady's accomplished, whoever knitted it. I'm saying lady, it might have been a man. Because this pattern, there's a photograph of it, it comes from a knitting machine pattern collection. So these jumpers on this image were intended to be done by knitting machine. Ours is hand knitted. So they've transferred the pattern and done it by hand. You can see the knitting machine pattern is much more elaborate. It's got nets for the balls here at the side. It's got colour changes, nets at the top, different colour changes around the neck, and so on. I don't think anybody will have translated this pattern, this camera enthusiast pattern, into a hand knit pattern. That looks like a bit of a challenge to me. But the book that it came from is Pat Cook Collection for Duo 80 Machines. There we go. We've got a willow pattern picture jumper. We've got forest scenes. We've got one that's got a sort of fishy arm and
salmon.
Yes, salmon.
And Yorkshire views.
Oh, we've got an amazing number of picture jumpers, which have seemed to have lost their popularity a little bit. Oh, and some advertising jumpers too. This is the last piece I'm going to show you, and this is here because of its just exquisite knitting. We have no backstory about this. We know that a guild member purchased it. If you look at the banner from the Knitting and Crochet website, the coloured banner with the overlap of different textiles and images relating to Knitting and Crochet Guild, these crochet squares and this jumper appear on it. It was bought from a textile fair, and it is just technically excellent. It's got these amazing scalloped edges. We've no idea if this was created from a pattern or by the knitter. It's knitted in wool and crocheted and joined, just superbly joined. The bottom here, wonderful, scalloped at the bottom. And there you can see the damage that it came with, and there's no attempt to replicate that stitch at all. That's the state it came in a used state, but we don't know how old it is. We can only make an assessment, and that's what happens with everything that's donated. We either have a backstory, or the people here, or the people at the accession meetings when they're deciding what donations to add to the collection, use their knowledge, their expertise, and just their observation, really, to work out what the garment represents, what the item represents, and whether it's worth keeping in the collection.
Can't accept everything.
No, and so there are examples of every technique, every style, every era, I think,
Yes.
but not multiples of such. So I think that's about all I've got to say, and I dare say some of you will have some questions or comments, and I am not one of the experts of the Guild. I'm just a mouthpiece, but I'll try to answer from what I've picked up, and I've got some extra brains here in the form of Alex and Tricia, who may be able to add to your queries if you've got them.
That was a fantastic indication of what the collection is and what it means. And I think the point that you made about the historical significance of these places, setting them in a historical time, but also the importance of the backstory and who made it, and the links between the patterns and the equipment. I think that was absolutely outstanding. And my only regret is I can't be there with my white gloves on and fondle the stuff myself.
Oh, thank you, Janet.
But I think that was a fascinating talk. I think you talked very eloquently and
Oh,
very
thank
well.
you.
And the only criticism I'd make is I wish you'd stop apologising. But I say that to a lot of people, so there you go. So we'll
Yeah, I
stop.
really
I nearly said I'm sorry, Janet, for apologising.
Oh, shucks.
Yeah, well, I have to add, of course, that this group of items was selected not by me. Barbara, who is publications, what's her title? Curator. Put this group of items together, and she supplied much of the information. All the bits of irrelevant stuff might be mine, but I'm not apologising for them, Janet.
Good. That's it. So before Julie runs off again, talking about something else that she's going to apologise for, comments and questions, please.
thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. That was brilliant. It was really good.
Good.
Really loved it. I love seeing it go through, you know, the way you put it in chronological order in the different time. It's really fun to see it.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it.
But there was a bit of a segue from each item, actually, you know, but I don't know whether. I'm sorry, Janet, I might not. I might not have explained that properly. But yes, you know, from lace to made of knitted lace, then crochet lace, and so on. And as you say, through the decades up to relatively modern things.
I think your segues were really good, and Jennifer has a comment or question.
Yes, I was just going to say, my daughter knitted that corn sweater. It was absolutely beautiful. She didn't use Aran, she used a sort of fairly rough oiled wool, and it was absolutely beautiful. She didn't do the little bobbles on it though. She decided to take those off, so it was a little bit plainer than the one that you've shown. And in the same edition, there was a most fabulous jacket designed by the Bishop of Leicester, which had, I think Leicester, I think I'm right about that. He was known as a knitter, and he got beautiful flowers in a sort of Estonian pattern, I think.
Was that Richard Rutt? Was that Richard Rutt, was it?
I'm not sure.
Bishop. Yeah.
Yes, we've got a book in the collection by him.
Oh, right. Well, it was a beautiful jacket that went with, that was in the same edition as that, and looked for it ever since. But and of course she's thrown it away, and I'm afraid the moths got to the.
Oh no! Well, luckily our one survived. It does specify. Was it Jennifer?
Yes.
Jennifer. It specifies here in Barbara's notes. It says the pattern could be obtained by sending a stamp addressed envelope to Carter and Parker in Guiseley, and it used Wendy Aran wool.
All right.
So it sounds as though your oiled wool was much more authentic, but I don't think the pattern was an authentic Aran pattern, was it? It's just a beautiful jumper.
Yes. Yeah.
There were quite a few patterns in newspapers at the time. I used to tear pages out and file them, you know, from things like the Sunday Times, and I had for absolutely decades, I don't know if I still have it, some patterns for some really abstract sort of jackets and things that were ultra super modern and fashionable at the time. On skin.
And of course all
Busted after being
the weekly magazines used to have patterns in the Woman and Woman's Own and Woman's
yes, indeed. And of course, we've got a lot of those in the collection as well. We have boxes and boxes of publications that have knitting patterns in. And this is what some of us do here when there are things to sort or like patterns to put in order. We've got so many patterns from the knitting yarn companies. You know, we've got tens of thousands of patterns, and sometimes we've got multiple copies, so we have to go through and select the best copies and keep a maximum of 3, I think it is, that we have. But
The one that does patterns regularly now is Prima, isn't it? They give
the
that-
magazine that does
yeah, Prima
patterns,
magazine.
yeah. I
Are you
think,
going to come into camera shot, Alex? Because we can hear this disembodied voice.
sorry.
And it would
Come
be
and join us.
I'm coming.
Of course, I
Nice to
can
meet you.
talk the hind leg off a donkey, but I can't do it without this extra pair of hands organising me and keeping me, you know, supplied with the goods. So thank you, Alex, for
That's
that.
okay.
That was a
Thank
brilliant
you
help.
indeed. Now, I
I
was
do
thinking-
recognise some of you from when any of you came up to the mill when we did the lace. Yes, I thought I recognised some of you. Yeah.
I don't think Tricia was with us at that time, Tricia Scott, who's with us now. But I thought about her with the idea of converting machine knitting patterns into hand knitting patterns. Tricia's trying to do the other way round, aren't you, Tricia?
Which one is Tricia? Sorry.
Oh,
hello,
hi, Tricia.
We haven't got any names up, so
Can I just ask a question, Janet, about the recording? Because we were talking about this the other day, and you know, we were trying to latch on to having more things available to send online. Can we have a copy here at the collection?
Of course you can.
Yeah,
What I thought we could do is we could just have the raw recording, which is all the if, buts and maybes, or we could ask Steve after the unconvention to tidy it up.
oh,
So,
that would be, yeah, that would be excellent.
but he
I
won't
think
be
that
able
would
to do it until after September because he's busy with the unconvention.
Yes.
We'll
and
certainly
so
send you- if
it
Linda
could be
can
sent
send-
to, could be sent to any branch then, couldn't it?
Yes, it could, indeed. And I think this is something that we need to develop personally. Whilst I'm still chair, I can say this. It's something that we need to develop because it's lovely to get your hands on these things and rummage amongst the books and the equipment. But many of us live too far away and we don't have the time or the money to get there to do these things in person. So seeing something on screen might be a second best, if you see what I mean.
Yes. So if we could have a library, couldn't we?
Yes, indeed. And anytime you want to practice on the Birmingham branch,
Okay,
we are going to carry on with Zoom meetings even after we meet in person. So we could have a monthly collections meeting. Well,
Well,
you
you
might
know-
as well ask, hadn't you? If you don't
maybe a quarterly one, Janet.
okay, quarterly one. You see, if I'd asked for a quarterly one, you'd say 2 a year. So now I've got a quarterly one. So I'm happy with it.
I'm not promising that. Hey, I'm not promising that.
You do them as and when you've got the time and the capacity, and you can sound
Exactly.
them out on us any day of the week. Okay,
Righty-ho. Yeah.
right.
I was just going to say, did anyone have any questions about the garments before we, or the other items?
I'll tell you something, they've gone in the freezer already.
And why did you go in the freezer, ladies?
We've got Tricia working behind the scenes, and a lot of these garments, they've been to Lindy, to a couple of her branch meetings, and they've been posted back to us. And because they've been out and about for so long, we need to get them in the freezer and kill them off if there is one there.
Don't ask to see anything again because you'd have to go and look in the freezer.
Can we give a big thank
Shall
you
we?
to the team?
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Well done. That was superb, informative, exciting, and enjoyable.
Thank you.
Good.
Brilliant.
Are you going now?
You're very
Yes.
gracious. Yes, we're going to have some lunch in the not too hot sun if we can find a shady place.
Excellent. Well, you go and have your lunch and we'll talk about you and say how wonderful you've been.